Hello, I'm Tina Taylor, and I'm here with Dr. Richard Bandler. Now, over the years, I've seen you do many amazing things on the stage. And what I've noticed is what you do is evolving. Every time I see you work, you're changing, you're doing different things. What inspires you?
Well, to start with, I would be the world's biggest hypocrite if I didn't change.
Yes.
I'm in the business of change, and I believe change occurs by getting smarter and more skilled. And I, of course, attempt to become smarter and skilled and to update everything I do any way I can. Part of the reason I read as much as I do, I'm a very avid reader, read lots and lots of journal articles about lots of things. Most of what I read is not inspirational, but if I find one little thing, I will take it in my work and use it everywhere I can. And when I'm doing things, I'm always looking for a quicker, easier, more effective way to do it. And, some people teach 1 year 50 times, and I've taught for 50 years. And there's a real difference between those two things. You can repeat your behavior, and now that we have videotape, that seems unnecessary. That to me, teaching is a living experience where you express yourself, you influence. Every audience is different. The needs of every group is different. And I set different goals every time. I try to challenge myself as well as them to accomplish as much as possible.
And I definitely appreciate that because I have learned so
You're
much
welcome.
from watching you over the few years I've been watching you. Something that is in the back of my mind, and a couple of my students have asked me this. Now, I've seen you do some amazing things on the stage. I saw you once in London, I think it was in 2002. A guy had Parkinson's disease, and you hypnotized him, and the shaking stopped. And the question is, how do you know how to proceed with your clients?
That's not entirely accurate. It wasn't hypnotizing him that made the shaking stop. That if you understand enough about neurology, then you understand that the shaking is because your whole life you've been using proprioceptive feedback to attempt to hold still. And what I really did with him was got him to stop focusing on the proprioceptive feedback and to use a different part of his neurology. I held my finger out and said, "Go to touch my finger." And as he went to touch my finger, just before he touched my finger, I went 1, 2, 3, and when he touched my finger, since he was focusing on the end of the skin to know when the touch was, his shaking stopped. And as I kept doing that and getting him to focus his attention on the surface of the skin, when I did hypnotize him, I kept stroking his skin and telling him, if you feel the outside of your skin, you can literally locate where your arm is, and getting him to do it in a new way. And I repetitiously, a number of times, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, kept counting 1, 2, 3 and having him reach out. And nobody was more surprised than he was, except maybe me. I just tried it to see what would happen. There just happened to be 700 people watching. But if you don't try things, you don't find things. It was an unusual request. Somebody brought him in the back in the green room because it was a very large group and it had a separate room, and asked if Paul would do something to get him, to accept the deterioration from his disease. And it just sounded depressing to me.
Yeah. So
I said, line him up to go on the stage, right? And the person looked at me like, what? And as I walked out, Paul McKenna even said to me, he goes, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. But the first thing that I noticed was that that I found the shaking annoying. So I figured he must too. That's not even actually what he had asked for. But, there are a lot of side effects to Parkinson's. Sometimes they hallucinate. My mother had late onset Parkinson's, and she, being her, would look at me and she goes, is there anyone else in the room? Right. And when I'd go, no, she'd go, okay. But the fact that she was asking kind of led me to believe she was seeing people that weren't there. And then sometimes she would ask about dogs. She used to have dogs, but she goes, is there a dog running around in this room? And I'd go, no, there isn't. But, that I don't know if it's a side effect of the medication or the Parkinson's itself, but, the fact that people have to learn to not be frightened by things from things. There are some very serious diseases that have some very serious side effects. And if we don't warn people about them, it scares people.
Yeah.
And learning to control things, if I can get schizophrenics to control their hallucinations, certainly you should be able to control the hallucinations that come from all kinds of things. And shaking, there's more than one way to stop shaking. If you try to stop it, it actually makes it worse because the myelin on the nerves is deteriorated over time, and it's just the wrong way to go about it. But if you trust the plasticity of the brain can relearn things all over the place. I had somebody who had nerve damage and literally had lost the use of their legs, but yet they could feel the bottom of their feet. So I hypnotized them and exaggerated, did hyperesthesia, made it so that they could feel it, 100 times more intensely than they normally did, so that they could tell when they were leaning forward and back, and they were able to get up and walk with a walker when they hadn't been able to do that in years. And if we trust things, we can create a sense of balance for people that don't have it. We have to understand that, when you get the brain to conceive of it, it finds ways to do things. This is what it has to do from the moment you're born, is find ways to do things. And there are the most likely way to learn language and the most likely way to know where your arm is. But it doesn't mean it's the only way. To begin with, both sides of the body are controlled by both hemispheres. This hemisphere controls this side of the body and this side of the face. And this one, the inverse, but not 100%. And with everybody, the percentage is a little different. So relearning the plasticity from the other side of the brain will be different for different people. We need to trust their ability to learn and find ways to teach them.
That's great advice. So many times you see on Facebook, for example, new practitioners of NLP will put on the page, I'm seeing somebody tomorrow for this. What should I do? What advice would you give them?
New things would be the answer in a nutshell. And remember, it's neuro-linguistic programming, not guessing neuro-linguistic programming. The answers are in the way our neurology works. Luckily, when I was starting out, Paul Baccarita was in some back room in San Francisco Medical School, and I had read an article by him where he talked about the plasticity of the brain. And I went up and went through all these psychological labs where they were torturing animals. And in this dark back room, this guy was teaching people to see with little things that went on their back, creating an image on their back instead of in their brain because they were blind. And he had them walking around through taped lines on the carpet and doing it correctly. And when I started asking him, I said, how does the brain make an image from these little things on it? And he explained to me, he said, what part of the brain does what is not fixed? He said, the plasticity of the brain can be re-educated. And the minute he said that, I thought, what a great thing.
Yeah.
When I worked with Moshe Feldenkrais and saw how he was able to re-educate the body to do things where there was, brain damage, strokes, all kinds of things, bullet wounds, for heaven's sakes. He was in Israel and a flautist had nerve damage, and he got the guy playing by moving the flute instead of moving the fingers. And it was like he had to relearn to play, but since he had the ear already, the ear became the guide to make new body movements to be able to play as well as he did before. Very impressive. But once I understood the principle of plasticity, and we all have to understand that if you really listen to clients and you really listen to their doctors, because their doctors tell you a lot of stuff you should listen to and a lot you shouldn't listen to, but things like blood tests, x-rays, MRIs, I listen to these things. And when they tell me somebody's got a stroke, a lesion in the brain, then, we've got to find ways around it. How do we take some other part of the brain and get it to get the same outcome so that they can do, because a lot of times I've been told people wouldn't be able to talk again, walk again. I'm an example of that myself. And if you trust, so to speak, the force or the wisdom of the brain, then your job is to create opportunities by utilizing our ability to altered states. Because every neurolinguistic programmer should be a good hypnotist.
Yes,
that, and not just the kind that says, look at my watch. I'm talking about somebody that has an appreciation for the infinite variety of altered states, from meditative states, to learning states and all these things, so that we can access more of the brain than people are using consciously when they have limitations.
That's fabulous. One last request for today.
Okay.
You could give some advice to my students on how they can improve their ability to work with clients.
Well, to begin with, one of the ways you can improve your abilities is to become one of your students. I would say that. I've known a lot of trainers over the years, and I've asked them to do a lot of different things while seminars are going on. And from the example yesterday, I know you're one of those people without hesitation that does things and gets things done. And certainly, if you're going to learn to be a good hypnotist, going to your hypnosis school is a good idea. And, all the hypnotic training you get from everybody. Remember, I learned from people before there was NLP.
Yeah.
And I went to the most covert hypnotist in the world. I also went to the most overt hypnotist in the world. I went to anybody who was getting results and learned the way they thought about it and how they did it, and with a grain of salt, because I knew ultimately, no matter how you explained how people changed, if this explanation and this explanation both got a change in a person, what they shared in common was the neurology. The more skills you have, the better off you are. So your students should pay attention. That's my advice. Pay attention, listen, practice, practice, practice.
Thank you. And thank you very much for today.
You bet,
Thank
Tina.
you.